But even from high above, some Minnesotan landmarks remain larger than life. This German chieftain, who once battled the Roman army, stands watch over the town of New Ulm in the Minnesota River Valley. Standing 32 feet tall, Hermann the German peers down on a town that looks like it could be in southern Germany. That's because back in the 1850s, the German founders of New Ulm set out to create a haven for their own culture and traditions. Even these days, polka music often fills the streets and glockenspiel bells ring on the hour. Many of the town's most important buildings are German-inspired, from the brick clock tower of its cathedral to one of the most unique-looking former post offices in America. But New Ulm may be best known for this brick factory, built in 1860 by a young machinist named August Schell, who wanted to bring good German beer to his growing town. Today, Schell's brews are still considered some of the best in the country. At the time, the brewery and New Ulm sat smack in the middle of Dakota's Sioux land, the easternmost territory of the Sioux people. When the Dakota Sioux came to town to trade, Mrs. Schell often gave them food. That's because times were tough for members of the tribe, and only getting tougher as settlers and the U.S. government started pushing them off their land. Tensions that would soon explode in one of the bloodiest conflicts in Minnesota history. In 1851, the Dakota were pressured by the U.S. government to sell half of Minnesota for the promise of supplies, education, gold, and a reservation along the Minnesota River. But the U.S. soon broke that treaty when it defaulted on its payments. After a series of bad harvests, the Dakota Sioux were pushed to their breaking point. In August 1862, small bands of Dakota warriors began launching raids on the northern fringe of their reservation, which bordered the Minnesota River. They attacked farms and villages, killing hundreds of settlers and taking women and children hostage. One of the fiercest battles was fought at New Ulm. Outnumbered, New Ulm's 300 defenders began burning down much of their own town in an effort to fend off the attack. When the battle ended, New Ulm lay in ruins. The U.S.-Dakota conflict of 1862 was one of the largest attacks on settlers in U.S. history. After 6 weeks of bitter fighting, 400 civilians and U.S. soldiers, as well as countless Dakota Sioux, were dead. In late September, the Dakota Sioux finally surrendered, and U.S. soldiers took more than 1,000 members of the tribe captive. But the grisly end of the war was still to come. It happened here in the town of Mankato, on the banks of the Minnesota River. At Reconciliation Park, on Mankato's waterfront, stands a white buffalo. Sculpted from a 67-ton block of Minnesota limestone, it marks an execution site. On the morning of December 26, 1862, 38 Dakota prisoners were marched to a makeshift scaffolding here on the edge of town. A crowd of nearly 4,000 citizens had gathered to see justice served. And as the nooses were tied around their necks, they sang a Dakota song. Then, with a swift blow of a soldier's axe, the floor below them fell away, and 38 members of the Dakota Sioux were executed all at once. It would be the single largest mass execution in U.S. history. The following year, in 1863, 6,000 Dakota people were forced to relocate to South Dakota and Nebraska.